Sound is good. Let's start. I didn't set out to be a podcaster. That was not the goal. I sort of got into it by accident, but also not by accident. My background is I was a radio broadcaster for 16 years. Started out at my hometown radio station, did an internship at K-Rock in New York City, pretty big station, where Howard Stern was the morning show host. Went on to run radio stations in New York and Pennsylvania. And then somewhere along the line, I just fell out of love with it. Went back to school to become a physical therapist. And that was the plan. The plan was become a physical therapist. Life threw me a curveball. In the middle of PT school, I went to a conference. Sat in a room full of 1,000 people, right? We've all done that. And then heard people on stage explaining things to me. And I understood most of it, but not all of it. But I wasn't about to raise my hand and stop their presentation in a room full of 1,000 people. So I kept my mouth shut. And 2 hours later at the networking hour, happy hour, I saw the presenters that I wanted to understand more from. And I said, you know what? I paid money to be here, spent time and effort to get here. I'm going to learn something. And I might have also been 2 or 3 beers deep. So I marched on over and just reached out my hand and said, I'm Jimmy. I'm a second-year PT student. And I saw your presentation and I just wanted to understand more. And part of my brain or part of my personality that I thought I left behind in radio just sort of turned back on again. I realized that I was sort of interviewing them on the fly. My classmates who were kind of like around were like, what was that? Like you sort of like changed personalities. And I guess I did. But I understood these people's 90-minute presentation in 15 minutes. None of that information was over my head. They were presenting it on stage. They were giving a presentation on stage. But in the bar at the happy hour, we were having a conversation. And it was on the ride back to PT school from the conference that I realized I learn better from conversation than I do from presentation. I think most people do. And this was 2015. And I pitched the idea to my classmates. What if I just interviewed super smart people in physical therapy as a way to learn more, but shared them on this thing called a podcast. 2015, you still needed to explain to people what a podcast was. And they said, that's a horrible idea. Don't do that. Study. Just why are you wasting time doing this? And luckily enough, I repitched the idea to my advisor in PT school. And she was like, I don't know what this is, but I think it's cool. So just try it and see where it goes. And where it's gone is, 4 million downloads later, the show that I launched in PT school as a student, I still continue to do to this day. And it's been heard in 176 countries. What it's also led to is a community. I have met so many people because of the podcast, either being guests or listeners. It's really helped me find a really great place for myself in this profession. I hope it helps other people find a place for themselves in this profession. I mean, really, that's the goal. I mean, I say if this podcast does nothing else, if it can help one other person connect with an idea or a passion or another person, to me, that's perfection. So I didn't set out to do this. I'd love to say I was strategic. It was a happy accident. But that doesn't mean you can't be strategic in terms of launching a podcast. So this course is going to give you the basics on how to do that, right? I'm going to share some insights, but really it should come from you. This should be quite literally and figuratively your voice in terms of what you're going to share with the world. And there are so many things you can do with just sharing audio. It just excites me. So I'm glad you're here. This is the first step in launching your complete healthcare podcast, but it's not the only step. You've got to take all these lessons and you've got to do something with it. So I'm starting from lesson number 1, being very clear that just signing up and watching these videos is not enough. You've got to take the steps. So that's my origin story. So ask yourself, why? Why do you want to start a podcast? Why do you want to start a show? There's really only 2 things you can do with content. It's what I tell people that I work with. You can inform and you can entertain. Now, there's a bonus 3rd thing you can do. If you can inform and entertain at the same time, you've got yourself some magic. So think about what are the reasons why you want to begin, because when this gets hard, and it will, to turn that microphone on or to reach out to guests or to do all the things behind the scenes that you might not see just yet. If you don't really, really like it, or maybe even borderline love it, it will get really hard to continue. And that's where it's funny. I start to talk more people out of starting a podcast than in. It's not that I don't want more people to start podcasts. I do. I'm making this course. What I don't want you to do is start the podcast because it's a thing on a list to check off. Don't do it. Unless this really like motivates you, right? Unless this really like wakes you up and says, this is something I want to do. This excites me a little bit. All right. Having a little bit of fear, perfectly fine. I'm going to help you reduce a little bit of that anxiety with this course. If you aren't excited at the idea of the process, my suggestion is don't start. So this is step one. Ask yourself why. What are you looking to do with your show?